The Home Pros Radio Show.
I'm Tommy Donovan, and this is the Home Pros Radio Show podcast. In this episode, we continue our discussion of your home's plumbing supply system with Scott Smith from All Clear Plumbing. Previously, we discussed the various types of plumbing supply piping materials in our homes and how they're assembled. In this episode, we continue our conversation with Scott as we talk about some of the devices we place on our water supply system that help keep things running smoothly. Let's start with handling the pressure at your water main.
We were talking about water mains and the size. Of course, 3/4 inch is the norm now. It used to be 1/2 inch. That was mainly volume. But then, of course, once you increase the volume or the size of the pipe, then you worry about the pressure because you increase the diameter, the pressure decreases. And then, of course, we're dealing in different areas of the country with having enough pressure come into homes or having too much. We have a device that is required now on our water mains. It's a pressure relief valve, or it's a pressure regulator. When did we start requiring that?
Well,
on our supplies?
Like in the region, like in the upstate here, you know, it's hilly, mountainous area, so they have to boost the pressure up so everybody has equal pressure.
So you might have people that are up on Altamont Road on top of Harris Mountain, right, and then they're trying to get water down to the folks in Fountain Inn at the same time.
And it runs, you know, from 80 to 125 PSI, depending on the area you're in, where they're, you know, if it's real hilly. So, you know, the pressure should never exceed 80 PSI. It should be between 70 and 80 or lower. The higher the pressure, the more wear and tear on all the seats. When you heat water, it expands, makes pressure. It's, you know, that's why we have to have expansion tanks and things like that. So the pressure regulator brings that pressure down to a manageable state, and it's less wear and tear on your pipes.
So it, to a certain extent, it actually takes the brunt of some of that extra pressure that we do receive on our plumbing system. And then that's something you can also adjust on your home too.
That's correct. You can, there's an adjustment on every regulator where you can, there's base models that when you buy a pressure regulator from Watts or one of these other manufacturers that has baseline, it'll say between 40 and 70 PSI or higher. They're different brands have different ratings on them, but there's an adjustment where, you know, you can buy a little pressure gauge, hook it to, I always say go to the back faucet, because some of the newer houses, they put the pressure regulator after that front faucet, your hose bib outside, so you have, you know, you can run a sprinkler and you can run that. That's usually at full pressure. So someone would go to their front and test it, and they may have 125 there. It's like, well, I have a brand new pressure regulator. We'll go to the back faucet. And that one is probably on different. That. Okay. Because, you know, they just some people want that pressure to, you know, wash their car and do that.
Well, I have a lot of folks who on inspections who will go, can you check that? I mean, this isn't within the scope of what we do, but I carry a gauge with me. And they'll go, can you check that pressure? Because it's not what I want it to be. But, you know, of course, as long as it's within the range of, you know, 40 to 80 PSI, that's considered acceptable. I mean, it may be down like at 50. But, you know, it's something that can even if it's not acceptable to you, it is, if it's within that range, it should be something you can adjust.
That's correct. Yes.
And then if you have high pressure, I think that leads us to what I'm trying to get to. We've been trying to get to for 2 weeks. This. And what we've been trying to get folks to take note of is what, Shane?
It's the actual water hammer. Not the actual toilet flush and the sound of somebody beating on a door right after they flush the toilet.
Yeah. And what causes that to happen?
High pressure is the biggest culprit. Where you're going to hear that is automatic valves, like washing machines. When they click on, they have a solenoid valve, or a dishwasher, or like in toilets, the ball cock valve it'll open when you flush it. It comes on, but it will slam the little washer in there, and it'll make that bumping noise.
It's that sudden shutoff of the water supply that causes the pressure all of a sudden to hit, and that's where you get the pipes rattling and the dun-dun-dun-dun.
And that's a 90% of the time. There are other things like loose washers, some valves like that will cause that. But 90% of the time, it is a pressure issue.
And how do we address it?
By checking the pressure regulator. That's the first thing, because, there's still a lot of houses out there that don't have them.
Now, when the cause of water hammer can be traced to a specific fixture in your home, another solution is a water hammer arrestor, which we learned about from Scott Smith in another episode of our show.
So when we have a situation where our water pressure is too high, we address it with water hammer arresters. Where are they normally installed? I see them in newer homes around like the laundry boxes, the water supply.
Right. Anything that has a electric solenoid that turns on and off the water. Dishwashers.
Under a kitchen sink.
Under the kitchen sink, you'll see them on the supply going to that. You'll see a water hammer arrestor. And you'll see those on washing machines. Mainly your two big culprits. But even on toilet supplies, they do make them on that water stop if you have that problem. It usually is a pressure problem, and the pressure regulator can take care of that. That's the first thing to tackle instead of adding all these different things. But if you're hearing when you're everybody will run the dishwasher, set delay on it in the middle of the night, you hear that thump, and that usually means that the water pressure's high or that solenoid is hammering that one pipe, and you can put that aftermarket water hammer arrestor on there, and that will take care of it 90% of the time.
Well, what about in this situation where, like, for instance, on the sound, we had the toilet, whenever the toilet was flush was when it happened. If you had to put a water hammer arrestor on that, is there a place you could put it?
Yes, they have them that will actually piggyback right onto that 3/8 by 3/8. It'll go in line right there.
Do they make them so they can go on those connectors? Or no?
Yeah, they'll connect, screw right down on there. They're not very glamorous looking. They're functional.
But this is our toilet,
and it goes right there where the shutoff valve is. Then.
Right, it goes right there on the water stop.
I mean, the water stop isn't that attractive anyway. So I mean, putting it there, I don't guess it really makes a huge difference.
How does it work?
It works like a shock on a car.
Folks, if you haven't seen one before, it's almost like a bullet, or it's
a bulb,
like a little, or a CO2 canister, like for an air rifle or something like that.
Yeah.
What they have, it's full of like a oily substance, and it acts like a shock absorber in there. It takes that pressure and it compresses that fluid inside. You used to see, like in the walls, if you ever went in a house under construction, they would take where it was 1/2 inch coming, they would bush it up to 3/4, and they'd put about a foot of pipe and a cap on top, and that would have like an air chamber in there, and that would take care of a lot of the water hammers.
When did they do this?
They still do that. Okay. I mean, they still do that today. Okay. But a lot of the houses that are CPVC and the newer, you can't really do that. So you have to, there's different brands out there. Sioux Chief is one of the larger ones that make a actual water hammer arrestor.
Now, one question that I help homeowners tackle on a regular basis while on home inspections involves that little tank that your plumber has installed above your water heater. Well, what is it? It's a device that has been added to building code requirements over recent years. That basketball-sized tank that you're likely to find installed with new water heater installations is called an expansion tank. It is a valuable feature that is intended to help preserve the integrity of your plumbing system and may even minimize the occurrence of common plumbing issues that can develop in your water supply pipes and fixtures. Let's bring Scott Smith with All Clear Plumbing back in as he tells us more.
Expansion tanks.
They're now commonplace.
Because you have a check valve or a swing check at your meter, and it can hold that pressure in your house. the line going to your house and that. So when you heat water, you create pressure. So basically that expansion tank, it allows that pressure to expand into it, and it's put on the cold side. We have all seen them on the hot side
That's
of a
another
water
question that
heater.
I have.
It has to be on the cold side, and it has to be within at least 6 feet or more of that. It just can't be randomly stuck under the house way away from it. It will do its job, but not effectively.
Now, a couple of times you've mentioned check valve.
Yes.
Just to kind of back it up for the folks out there who are unfamiliar with what it is, it's basically a valve that allows water in, but doesn't let it back out into the
That's correct.
public system.
And in the old days, and there's still
And that's what's
thousands
at the meter, correct?
Right. There's thousands of. It's called a swing check,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a little mechanical. It's a little flapper inside of a device that, when the water pushes back, it closes tight and doesn't let that water push back into the system. Now we have a dual check. It's a spring check. It's a lot more efficient
Mm-hmm.
than the old ones, because the old ones were brass and they could get a little chip in there and they could fail and not do their job. So
The water comes in. So the water comes in from the water main, and then it branches off into the hot water or it's cold. It goes to the water heater, and this is where we run into the installation of the expansion tank. So it's usually maybe a basketball-sized tank that's installed above your water heater.
Right.
That it's installed on the
cold
side. I'm going to take a note of that. And I've heard it explained as it's a small tank that has a bladder in it.
Right. It's for thermal expansion. Big word of the day.
Another big word.
Thermal expansion.
Ding, 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 ding. So what it does is it basically takes the brunt of the pressure that your water heater, the tank in your water heater, might be experiencing.
Right. There's a relief
Helps extend
valve.
the lifespan of it, right?
Right. Well, and it's a safety issue too, because there's a pressure and temperature valve on the side. Back in the old days, you'd hear of people, their water heaters would explode, and there's pictures of them where they've gone through the roof of a house. Well, if that safety valve's on there and it's working properly, and the lines going to it are installed properly,
Mm-hmm.
they're not reduced in size, that's almost never could happen.
Mm-hmm.
So those safety issues are just part of the progression of, back in the day, they did it one way and now we do it this way. And expansion tanks are one of those things we do now, because they have found, that hot water, when you heat it, it's expanding back into the system. And if you already have high water pressure, that's going to make that valve, that pressure and temperature valve, spit and open up.
It'll eventually start to leak and drip.
Right. Yeah. And it's going to cost you money as far as your water bill and your heating bill.
Well, for the homeowner who doesn't know what it's doing, I mean, I've literally been at homes where the house next door has water pouring out of the side of it because the temperature pressure relief valve drain line comes out the side of the home that they don't commonly see unless they're mowing the grass, and they don't know what's out there, taking hot water that they've paid to heat and just dumping it right outside.
Right. It's doing its job, and it'll continue doing its job, and it may only do that twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's dumping 50 gallons of water out there, and you heated that water, so that all of a sudden we get leaks. We'll go for a leak, and it'll be, you'll look, and the temperature pressure valve is just trickling out the side. They don't have a leak in their line. They have a pressure problem.
And it's a valve that just simply needs to be replaced.
Right.
Yeah. And that another thing to really, I mean, this is a side note, but you got scalding hot water coming out the side of your house that, say a kid happens to be in that area. There are codes to, get it close to the ground, get it outside and all that. But who's to say a kid's not going to go there and wash his hands off when he's been playing in the mud or whatever, not having any idea what the
Well,
temperature of
especially
that water.
since the non-assuming homeowner is like, why am I not getting as much hot water as I used to? So they
Right.
go and they turn up the
Oh, yeah.
temperature.
Oh yeah,
And
make
they
it
have
hotter, then
steam
it'll be
coming out of
better.
the- So, all right. So the temperature or the
Expansion tank.
expansion tank is intended to actually relieve that extra pressure caused by the hot water. Why then are we putting it on the cold water side as opposed to the hot water supply line coming out of the water heater?
Because it's building pressure, and that hot water is going to, the pressure is going to go to the least.
Basically,
It's going to be lesser pressure coming in, so it's going to push back.
I
So
see.
that's gonna
that
push-
makes more sense.
And it's going to push back against that check, all the way to pushing that pressure back against that check valve at the meter.
Okay.
And that expansion tank during those periods when, we've taken our showers at night and the pressure at night is going to go because everybody's stopping using water, so when that water is being heated in that large tank, it's making more pressure. So it's the place it can push back, especially when we're opening and closing cold water valves in the house, it's going to be able to ratchet back.
Okay.
And that's where we want to put it, is right above on the cold water side. So it pushes against that bladder in that tank and not our check valve at the meter.
Okay. And when I was first introduced to them, I understood them as expansion tanks' purpose was to extend the lifespan of your water heater, which in essence it does, but it also does so much more
Right.
to protect
The
the
whole
fixtures
system,
and
it
the whole
sounds like.
system, just like a pressure regulator.
Regulator.
I've also
PRV.
yeah. So there is a use for an expansion tank outside of a tank water heater. Like if you have a
Yes.
tankless water heater, there's still a benefit to having it on the system.
Right. Anytime you have that thermal expansion, especially if you have a loop system, you're supposed to put in a tank, an expansion tank.
Now you say loop system. Are you referring to like a recirculating system?
Recirculating pumps. Because you have thermal expansion. Anytime you're heating water, you have thermal expansion. So that's what they want it there for. And, we're not questioning why, we're just to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Special thanks to Scott Smith for helping us get to know our plumbing supply a little better. To contact Scott and his crew at All Clear Plumbing, call their office directly at 864-979-7059. You can also find them online at allclearplumbingupstate.com. We appreciate you taking the time to learn with us on the Home Pros Radio Show podcast. Please feel free to share our show with friends and family. Also, if you have a moment, write us a quick review, which will help us to broaden our reach to those out there who can benefit from our program. That's all the time we have for now. Until next time, I'm Tommy Donovan with RIC Home Inspections and your co-host for the Home Pros Radio Show.
Thanks for listening to the Home Pros Radio Show. Meet more Home Pros at homeprosradio.com. There, you can also catch full episodes of our show, along with additional information to ensure that your home is in perfect shape. It's the Home Pros Radio Show, brought to you by Prime Lending, home loans made simple. The Home Pros Radio Show, online at homeprosradio.com or on the radio at 94.5 WGTK, The Answer.